There are just 2 days left. The debates have been made, the speeches delivered. Now it's time for the final pitch from candidates as they campaign in a full-out sprint to the finish line. Our political insiders are weighing in on the latest polls and their predictions as Hoosiers make their decisions on so many political races.
From RTV6, Indianapolis this week.
In less than 48 hours, it is decision time, and months of campaigning come to a close. Hello, everyone. I'm Jenna Coy, and welcome to this edition of Indianapolis This Week. We start with what has been one of the tightest races in Indiana, but a new poll released 2 days ago has changed the face of this race. Richard Murdoch, Joe Donnelly, and Andrew Horning are all vying for Richard Lugar's Senate seat. The race became a toss-up once Murdoch defeated Lugar in the primary, but controversial comments on rape and abortion by Murdoch put his campaign on the defensive. So where do things stand right now? The first independent poll since Murdoch's controversial rape comments has an 11-point gap between him and Joe Donnelly. The Howie DePaul poll shows 47% for Joe Donnelly and 36% for Richard Murdoch. Before this, prior independent polls had the race at a statistical tie. We are joined now by what some would call a full house of political insiders. Republican Robert Vane, Democrat Laura Beck, editor of IndyPolitics.com, Abdul Hakim Shabazz, and Democrat Kip Tu. Thank you all so much for joining us on this really crunch time.
Literally crunch time.
The election is almost upon us. So, guys, what do you make of this latest poll in the Senate race, Abdul?
I give it all the credibility in the world. The two people who did the polling, a very credible Democrat, a very credible Republican, both have impeccable credentials in this business, have been doing it for 20 years, and the fact that the Murdoch people have been protesting and complaining about it ever since it came out, it's the old line, methinks they don't protest too much, which means they probably think it's true as well.
Laura, do you agree?
I absolutely do. I think that Murdoch's rape comment was the death knell for his campaign. It was over at that point in time, especially how he was not able to react from it. I mean, he was never able to gain ground after. So, yes, I think this poll is credible, especially as this race stands.
Is Murdoch worried?
He should be.
Can I just stop there? It's a significant gap, 3 days, before the election. And so I'd like to think that he has opportunities to make up ground. I don't think that he necessarily can among voters who have not yet voted. Murdoch's saving grace, if there is one, is that folks, the thousands, the tens of thousands of people who had voted prior to his comment and prior to perhaps being deflated by this poll, if the Republican get out the vote effort or absentee effort is successful, and I hear that it's doing really well, that could save him. But based on this poll, based on the last week or so, it's going to be extraordinarily tough for him to make up the ground.
I think it's all but over. I agree with the panel on here, and I find it curious that the day after he made the comments, the Republican Party had him in front of Republican Party headquarters with Republican Party brand right behind him. If I were a Republican running for office, I would have preferred they not do that, but I'm glad they did it as a Democrat.
Is there anything else that Murdoch can do to try to change the way this race seems to be going?
It might take an act of God, but I think he may want to invoke God's name more than enough. He may want to just leave that alone for a while.
I think when you talk about polls, they are a snapshot in time, and I think that's always something that you have to remember when you talk about polls. But on this race, it has been a race for the middle all along, and I think with Murdoch, it's been Murdoch versus Murdoch all along, because his own words are used against him time and time again, and he cannot recover from those stumbles. And so I think what he's done is he's effectively shown people he's not ready for prime time.
And picking up on that point, when you're looking at polling late in a campaign like this, what you want to look at, I think, is momentum and how things have shifted from one way to the other. And the Murdoch's going the wrong way at the wrong time, and I think that is not a good sign for him at all.
He does have a very deep and wide support among Republicans in Indiana because he's run a lot and he's a very hard worker. That may be enough to save him.
All right, we'll have to see what happens. There's another tight race that I want to talk about. What's becoming an even closer race, according to the Howie DePaul poll, is the race for governor, because it says Democratic candidate John Gregg is only 7 points behind Republican candidate Mike Pence. Libertarian Rupert Bono remains far behind in the poll. So John Gregg clearly has momentum in his favor. Will it be enough to carry him on Election Day, Kim?
Well, the poll came out of the field on Tuesday of last week, so John Gregg has to make up a point a day for him to be successful on Election Day. Is it possible? Definitely possible. possible. He's moving in the right direction. We're going to see. I think it's going to be the closest race on election night.
I don't think so. A lot of the polls that I've seen, they're sort of privately done by private organizations. They tend to parallel the Howie poll. It's a 7 to 9 to 11-point lead for Mike Pence. I don't see how John Gregg makes up that difference in 3 days.
I think, though, with John Gregg, he's surging at the right time. And I think for Mike Pence, he has spent millions of dollars in advertising, and poll after poll after poll shows he cannot crack 47. He cannot move the needle at all. And so I think that Gregg is going to surge at the right time. And I don't think, let's not discount the vote that's going to come out of urban areas this time around, too.
And what about Rupert? Does he affect this at all?
I think he is.
Yeah,
he does.
Every poll that I've seen says that he's taking 2 votes from John Gregg for every 1 vote that he's taking from Mike Pence. And so the question for Democrats is going to be, do you want to defeat Mike Pence, or do you want to lodge a protest vote? And as we reach the last few days of this campaign, hopefully they'll take a hard look at that decision.
7 points is a considerable gap to try to make up in just a few days. Remember, 2004, Mitch Daniels won by 7 points. I would imagine if you asked the Mike Pence people and you talked to them and said, look, on the week before the election, you can have an independent poll that says you're up 7 points, they would have taken that, and so would I.
The only thing about that, though, is that Gregg is showing polls that he's within 3. There is a poll he had last week that came out that said he was within 6. So it's anywhere from 3 to 10 at this point in time, and so I think that's really going to make it what
Laura,
to watch.
that poll had showed him respect. The poll had him within 3, didn't include Rupert. And we just sit there and said Rupert's really affecting the race. You can't just take a candidate and airbrush him out. So I don't know whether that. I don't know whether. Yeah. I don't know if that poll was done by the Clip and Curl polling service.
It was done by the Democrat Governors Association.
But you can't sit there and say
John's winning the Clip and Curl vote.
Well, I imagine that. But you can't have both ways. If you're saying he's 3, and that's legit and accurate, now you're saying he's down 7. So in other words, he lost 4 points.
No, she's saying I'm in the margin of error.
I'm saying it's all within the margin of error, and I'm saying that it's going to be a swing on
the 3-point poll.
Boy, someone is awfully sensitive about where Mike Pence is,
but here's the thing: whether it's 3, whether it's 6, whether it's 7, whether it's 9, Mike Pence is here and John Gregg is here, and it's who gets the most votes.
Well, it is, but momentum matters, and the thing is tightening up. And so I think that's, as I said, it's going to be a very close election. Election night, it may be the thing that we in Indiana are looking at as the closest race.
And don't discount the Richard Murdoch effect on Mike Pence.
I was going to ask
what kind of impact is that going to have?
Did you think that had a big impact on Pence? Little impact or no?
I don't think it helped. I mean, just be candid, I just don't think it helped. I mean, if Murdoch was up 11 points, would that help Mike Pence? Probably. The key thing will be, very quickly, it's going to be Indiana's going to go to Romney. It's going to go to Romney early. I know we're going to talk about it in a second. I just don't think you're going to have a bunch of Republicans who vote for Romney and then scratch for a D in the governor and scratch for a D in the Senate. I just don't think that's going to happen. I think that's going to be the Romney effect is going to help Mike Pence. Whether it helps Richard Murdoch, we don't know yet.
And then real quickly, how do women play into this? How do they vote?
I think women are going to be huge. I think they're huge every election, but I think they're going to be really important this election as well, because I think that the rape comments that Richard Murdoch made, essentially what they did was force everyone who's running for office this time to come out and say where they stood on the issue. You don't have to agree with it. They certainly are entitled to their beliefs, but it is allowing voters to make a very informed choice this election.
In that Howie poll, it showed the greatest movement for John Gregg among women, and I think it could be the deciding factor election night.
All right, we'll have to see what happens. We have a lot more to talk about. There are 9 U.S. House races Hoosiers will decide on Tuesday, and at least 1/3 of the seats from Indiana will have new faces. We'll break them down after the break. We're back with our political insiders as we count down to Election Day. Now we're turning our focus to the U.S. House races. 3 of the races feature no incumbents, so we will see new faces. One of those is the race to replace Congressman Dan Burton in Indiana's 5th District. Republican Susan Brooks, Democrat Scott Reske, and Libertarian Chard Reeder all in this race. I want to start with you, Robert. How important is this race for Republicans?
I really believe in some ways that the Susan Brooks race could be the most important race in the Indiana Republican Party for the next 20 years. Susan Brooks is an incredibly accomplished person, U.S. attorney, former deputy mayor. She's run a good campaign. She emerged from a pretty contentious primary. She's solidly conservative, but she has perhaps the most engaging personality you'll ever see in politics, and she has won people over. I could tell you this, when you go to Republican events, very few people get more applause than Susan Brooks, and deservedly so.
So you think she's going to win?
I think she's obviously going to win, absolutely.
What do the rest of you think?
And that's good for us. It's good for our brand.
I think we win because Dan Burton is not running again. I think we all do. With all due respect to Dan Burton, I just think the people of Indiana win. I'm probably going to get hate mail for that, but that's okay. Go ahead, you guys can answer the question.
I think Susan Brooks obviously has the advantage, but the election's on Tuesday. Scott Reske has been a good candidate. He's an Iraq war veteran. He is a fine person, had a good term in the legislature. He's been a very good campaigner. He's run a very hard campaign. Susan Brooks probably has the edge, but it's never over till it's over.
Susan Brooks wins. The big thing about Susan Brooks is she is extremely practical. She was the only Republican in the primary who didn't sign into the Grover Norquist tax pledge. She didn't do any of the gimmick stuff, and she actually won, and she won well. And she did very well over in Boone County, where you have a lot of those sort of soccer mom votes. So I expect Susan Brooks to walk away with it.
With any luck, we can get David Brooks in the Congress next.
I think, though, that Susan Brooks's response to Richard Murdoch's rape comment was one of the most interesting, in the fact that she said, he needs to apologize, and I think that really shows where women in her district are. I think Scott Reske's run a good race against her. I think he's run very hard against her, but it is a tough district.
Another race we want to talk about without an incumbent is the 2nd District, which was virtually redrawn, forcing Joe Donnelly to run for the Senate. This one features Republican Jackie Walorski and Democrat Brendan Mullen. Who wins this one?
Well, first of all, I don't agree that it forced Joe Donnelly to run for the United States Senate. He chose he wanted to run for the U.S. Senate. Brendan Mullen is as good a candidate as we could possibly hope for in the 2nd District. Also an Iraq war veteran, also a hero. Democrats went out and tried to get folks that were moderate Democrats to run in these seats, and Brendan Mullen's got a shot to win that race. Jackie Walorski is without a doubt the favorite. She's also a legislator and very sharp former newscaster up there, so she's been well known up in the district for a long time.
Walorski's to win. Walorski's to win.
Yeah, I think Jackie's got the name ID, and the district was drawn to make it more Republican, a lot more Republican than it was when Joe Donnelly was there.
All right, the 3rd race without an incumbent is the 6th District between Republican Luke Messer and Democrat Brad Bookout. This is a heavily Republican district.
There's a Democrat over there.
Brad Bookout.
Brad Bookout.
There's one. Luke Messer's another rising star of the Republican Party. He's paid his dues. He was in the state legislature. He worked as executive director for the Indiana Republican Party. He's run in that area before. He's from that area. He's very sharp, and he's particularly astute on education issues. He'd be a great voice for Indiana and Washington, D.C., especially on education.
Well, I would say that the difference between Susan Brooks and Luke Messer is the difference between Abdul and Robert. There's a huge difference between the two guys.
Yeah, I think there probably is.
And they're very different Republicans, and it's going to be interesting. I do think Luke Messer is the odds-on favorite to win in that district, but they are going to be very different Congresspeople, in my opinion.
Now, real quickly, do you see any incumbents losing?
No.
No.
It's 2 no's.
Oh, I think there's still a shot for Dave Crooks to pull it out in his district.
I think Shelley Yoder has run a very good campaign down south, and I think that this is not the last we're going to see of her. I think we're going to continue to see her out there, and I hope she keeps running.
Carlos Mays also, I think he's been a good candidate. He's worked hard. It's just a tough year to run in the 7th District with Barack Obama on the ballot, and that's what you've seen in other places. Good candidates in districts that are tough.
All right, you mentioned Barack Obama. After the race, we are turning our focus to the biggest race voters are talking about. President Obama and Mitt Romney, both candidates are jumping all around the nation right now. What our insiders are saying about this race. President Obama and Mitt Romney are in an all-out blitz with 2 days to go on the campaign trail. This race has been getting tighter in the polls for a number of swing states. Our political insiders are weighing in. Robert, Laura, Abdul, and Kip. All right, it seems each candidate may be trying to establish residency in Ohio because the Electoral College is balancing on the Buckeye State. What scenarios do you see possibly playing out in all this?
Every poll that I've seen, independent poll in Ohio, has a president with a 3 to 5 point lead. I think he's going to win Ohio, and I think he's going to win the presidency. I don't want to short-circuit conversation, but I think that's where it does come down to. There's other states that are in play. You have Iowa, New Hampshire, Florida, Virginia. Those are the states that everybody's looking at. And then you have to throw in Wisconsin because Paul Ryan's from Wisconsin.
I think Mitt Romney has a chance of winning without Ohio, but I was surprised about it, but totally agree with Kip. Throughout this entire, since the debates, and
do you want that on record for you? Record that moment for you?
It never helps when he agrees with me.
It's not in our contract.
Through floods and debates, the president's always maintained that sort of 3 to 5 point firewall that Mitt Romney's just never been able to quite get over, no matter how hard he tries. Now, like I said, he can win without Ohio, Florida, Virginia, North Carolina, maybe a couple other places, swing around Iowa and Wisconsin. But the president has always had the easier road to 270 than Mitt Romney has.
One of the most interesting things that has come out of Hurricane Sandy, which has been a terrible tragedy that has affected, hundreds of thousands of people, is that Governor Chris Christie in New Jersey and President Obama have somewhat established a little bit of a bromance, I guess you would say. And Governor Christie has been very complimentary of President Obama's efforts. And I think what it's showing is that you do need bipartisan cooperation to get things done when you are a leader. And there's been so much arguing over progress, and you've got somebody like a Richard Murdoch talking about how his idea of bipartisanship is getting everyone to come to his point of view, and watching how the two of them are working together, Governor Christie and President Obama, has really shown in these very last days how important bipartisanship is, and I think it's really elevating the argument in some ways.
Robert, how much an effect do you think Hurricane Sandy will have on the election, because Sandy didn't really affect the battleground states, the states that we kind of knew where they were going to go anyway?
I don't believe it's going to have any effect, particularly even though President Obama does get to be on the news all the time doing the right thing, and he does get to Laura's point, get to be seen with a very popular Republican and Chris Christie, the governor of New Jersey. Interesting thing, I would never refute the argument about Ohio. I mean, I think that may even be dispositive when it all comes down to it. But where else is it close? Romney's within 1 or 2 in Pennsylvania. He's within 1 or 2 in independent polls in Michigan. The president's campaign is so worried about it, they've spent millions of dollars in those states. If Romney can flip one of those states, I think Pennsylvania is more likely, and hold on to Wisconsin, then that takes the electoral map and shakes it up. Then it doesn't make necessarily Ohio so important. I'm not saying he's necessarily going to win, but there has been a tightening, as we've talked about with other races, in the presidential race in these key battleground states. If Romney can take Pennsylvania, that makes a huge difference.
Well, I think what's happening here in the last few days is in places like Pennsylvania and Michigan, Republicans are finally coming home to where they would be. But I'm going to make a prediction today that the president's going to win Pennsylvania. He's going to win Michigan. Wisconsin, I'm not willing to make that because Paul Ryan's on the thing. But if Mitt Romney doesn't do one of those things, then his roadmap to 270 is really difficult. He's got to win New Hampshire, he's got to win Virginia, he's got to win Florida, he's got to win Iowa, and I don't think he can win all those states.
In Florida, actually, there's been some movement. I was doing some reading just this past week that the Romney people felt really good about a week ago. Now the Obama people feel like they've got the momentum going into Florida, and I think literally that state's going to be, just whoever's got possession, you win.
It's interesting, too, in Florida, how the Obama campaign is bringing out former President Clinton. I think on Saturday he had 5 stops that he was hitting, and I think he's still incredibly popular, and I think that speaks to how he can very well condense down some very important arguments.
All right, I have to stop the discussion right there. After the break, it is decision time for our insiders: who wins, who loses, and the balance of the Indiana State House. They give their final word. We'll be right back. It is time for our analysts to put down the final word on their predictions for some of the key elections. First off, what are your predictions in the race for the U.S. Senate?
I'm predicting Joe Donnelly to be the United States Senator. Not a big surprise, but I think that's...
I'm sorry, I think the only way Richard Murdoch wins this is if God intends for him to win. That's it.
You like to keep saying that.
It's going to Donnelly.
Murdoch by this much, Romney pulls him over, as does Pence.
All right, then we're going to move on to the presidential race. Who takes Indiana first, Mitt Romney or President Obama?
I think Mitt Romney's going to win it. I hate to say it as a big Barack Obama supporter, but I think it's going to be Mitt Romney.
First intelligent thing he said all day, Mitt Romney.
Well, I think that President Obama could have really used Kip, too, during his campaign work again in Indiana. He's had a great team here in Indiana, but I think, unfortunately, he's going to come up short here. I'd say maybe 7:03 it'll be called.
So we'll be guessing what time.
I think so. Yeah, I think that's where we're
race.
moving to at this point.
Barack Obama has neither lived up to his promise or his promises, and Hoosiers are going to reject him this go-around, and Indiana's going to go to Romney, deservedly so.
Kip's ready to burst over.
Did you do that?
Yeah. We were predictions. I didn't think you were going to get into snark, but if you're going to get
You
into
could snark.
Yeah, we will. We'll save it.
We'll go back. We'll go back.
We'll save that for sticking with Indiana. Who's going to be Indiana's next governor? Robert?
Mike Pence. He's run a positive, disciplined campaign. He deserves to win, and that's great news for Hoosiers and Hoosier veterans.
Did you stick to your talking points on that one?
I can say them again if you like.
Okay. I'm going to say John
Mine aren't
Gregg.
written down.
Well, I have to write them down. I'm a busy person. I'm a mother. I forget these things.
Oh.
John Gregg by 1. That's right.
Ooh.
Unless John Gregg shaves off that mustache, he'd be the guy with no facial hair of Mike Pence.
I
You
think
have a
John Gregg's going to
mustache.
win in a
What are you talking
squeaker. I think it's been the most underreported and most fascinating race in this election cycle, and I think election night we're going to be up talking about that race for most of the evening. I think John Gregg in a squeaker.
So you think that will be too close to call?
It'll be the
Come
closest
10 or
race
11
of all
o'clock
the
at night?
headline
Of the
drivers.
headline racers, it'll be the close race.
Yeah. What about the overall race for president? Who's the next president of the United States?
I think Barack Obama is going to be the next president of the United States and the current president of the United States because he has saved us from the Second Great Depression, because he has saved the auto industry, because he has got us out of Iraq, because he killed Osama bin Laden. For all of those reasons, I think he deserves re-election.
President Obama. I agree completely.
Barack Obama, he's got a lot more paths to 270 in the Electoral College than Mitt Romney does. Just that simple.
Romney 272, 266. It's going to be that close. New Hampshire's going to decide it.
Wow, that is very, very close. All right, finally, the balance of the Indiana State House. Do Republicans get that supermajority they need to avoid any Democratic walkouts?
I think they get a functional supermajority. There'll be enough of them. You need 2 Democrats to call the motion to walkout and 1 to second. Republicans will get to like 63, 64, but there'll be enough Democrats that have to stay behind. They get a functional supermajority.
I don't think it's a good thing for Indiana's democracy to have supermajorities in both houses and the same party controlling the governor's office. That's why I think they're not going to get a supermajority and why I think John Gregg wins. I think Hoosiers were tired of what they saw in last General Assembly.
What Hoosiers are tired of are the walkouts and the Democrats' abrogation of responsibility. So the Pat Bauer party is going to be even more in the minority, and deservedly so.
I think that it is going to be hard for them to get the supermajority. If I were them, I wouldn't want the supermajority because they're in charge and they have everything.
All right, you four, thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure, and you can stay up to date on political news anytime by following our insiders, Laura, Robert, Kip, and Abdul, on our Capitol Watch blog. You can find the link on our webpage, theindychannel.com, and we'll have all of your coverage and the very latest results on election night right here on RTV6, including analysis from all of our political insiders. At 7, a full-hour special leading up to ABC News national coverage starting at 8. Then we'll continue our local coverage live on HTSN throughout prime time. At 11, we'll be back on RTV6 with the latest results on the local races affecting Hoosier voters. Keep it right here on RTV6 and HTSN for election night. That is it for this edition of Indianapolis This Week. Thank you so much for joining us, and remember to go vote on Election Day. I'm Jenna Coy. Have a great day.